All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our NCS webinar focusing on the issue of state advocacy. I'm Jill Escher. I'm the president of NCSA, and here I have a co-host, Leanne Morfitt, who is our policy chair, and also the coordinator of our National Grassroots Network. We have two speakers today. Our first speaker will just address us briefly, and that is Gayle Gerdes. You can say hi, Gayle.
Hello.
From Washington, D.C., and she's actually a lobbyist. She's the vice president at Health Policy Source, which is an advocacy group based in D.C. And then our featured speaker today is Susan Goldstein, who's a designated professional lobbyist at the Legis Group, which is in Florida. Legis Group, which I can never get right. And Legis Group. But she started off like all of us. She was an autism parent, and she took her advocacy all the way to becoming a state legislator, and now she works as a professional advocate. Pretty amazing story, in my view. So I think we're just going to get this going for the sake of time, and we're going to go ahead. We're going to start with Gayle, and Gayle's going to talk a little bit, not about state advocacy, obviously about federal level advocacy, and she has a couple slides. Do you want to go ahead and share those, Gayle?
Absolutely. I will hopefully quickly share my screen here. Can everyone see that? Jill and Leanne?
It's there. Yep.
All right.
Good job.
Great. So I'm Gayle Gerdes. I'm with Health Policy Source. We are a boutique, we like to call it, lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. We've been around for over 20 years. And we are a team of 4 people, and that allows us to give very personalized services for the needs of a client. So we can be a little bit more nimble, which I think is very helpful because in DC, things happen in chunks and are a bit unpredictable. While there certainly are patterns and things that have to happen, how they happen and when they happen has a lot of variability. So we try to make ourselves available and adaptable to update approaches and communications with whether it's Capitol Hill staff, so that's the House and the Senate, or whether it's with federal agencies such as ACL or HHS or Medicaid issues, which I know Susan will get into on the state side, but also really have a large component on the federal side as well. We also track judiciary issues. If there's cases that are impacting issues related to your priorities, we're going to be watching those and making sure that we give you updates on that as well. So let's see here if I can. So what do? We communicate when proposed federal regulations are released. There was a proposed rule released earlier this week that deals with the ADA and Section 504. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to be reviewing and advising on if it's worth commenting on. If so, helping with the submission of those comments. And we provide updates and information on any relevant legislation that's garnering traction. There's one today that I sent to Leanne and Jill that I think Jill said she put on the website, and it's a small subset of y'all. So I will share more than I think you need, so that then Jill and Leanne, they can say, yep, this is helpful for a lot of our folks or a small fraction of our folks. But I want to make sure that you have all the information you need on what's going on in Congress. I will assist with engagement with members of Congress, select committee staff, and key congressional staffers. We want to be mindful of your time, and we are here to be, often we say, the third arm for NCSA. And so over the past few weeks since we've been working together, we've had a handful of Capitol Hill meetings with some NCSA staff and members, as well as I've been on the Hill talking to staff and giving them an introduction if they need it to NCSA as well. We also assist with strategic engagement of federal agency leaders, and that gets back to kind of the HHS, the ACL, Medicaid officials. And so as that's appropriate, whenever that's appropriate, we will make those connections so that they know exactly what the nuanced needs and priorities are of you and your families and your family members. And then we provide summaries of federal meetings and hearings that, again, are related to your priorities. So I will attend in person sometimes because I want to touch base with the people in person, or I'll watch them online, a variety of meetings. There's one next Monday that I will be attending. No, I apologize, in October, that I'll be attending in Rockville, that deals with some disability issues that I want to make sure that I'm there to meet other federal staff that handle your issues so that they know as clearly as they can, you know, what you're looking for from the federal government, what you need. So this is just a real brief overview of how you as members, and Leanne has been fantastic, and I know she's working and may say something in a second about some of the state leaders and stuff. So I'm excited for that because I will get to hopefully meet the state leaders as we continue our work together. But as NCSA members, one thing on the federal level that you can do independent of me and Leanne and NCSA is you can reach out directly to your 2 senators and your member of the House, your representative in the House. And you, anytime that you see or feel that your family member is not receiving services that they are legally obligated to receive, and it's not that the district staff or state staff are going to be able to make it happen overnight, but they can be a tool in your toolbox of to be a resource for you. And in taking a few minutes to talk with them and email them, you're elevating the needs of this community to the congressional level, and they will communicate that with the DC office as well. So it's just everybody's time is precious, and I don't want to send anyone down a rabbit hole, but this is a way that you can potentially get real help, and 2, you will definitely help elevate the needs of the NCSA members and their families. So, and then the second part here with the emails and meetings with congressional staff, that's something that, just look at it. It's more what I'm going to be pushing to you over the coming months with Leanne and probably even with the state directors, and we'll just make this as easy for you as possible to work with us and to elevate your message to your members in Congress, because as a constituent, you are the most important voice they can hear from. So with that, I'm going to kind of pause, and I know Susan's got a lot tonight, and I've heard her on the podcast. If you haven't heard her on the podcast with Jill, it's fantastic interview. But you'll see more of me over the coming months. Please know that I'm here. Please, if you have questions for me, Jill and Leanne know how to get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to visit with anyone or give tips to anyone that I may be able to offer in the interim before you hear from me with requests from me.
Thank you so much, Gayle, for that wonderful introduction to the sort of work you're doing, and especially the sort of work you're doing with NCSA. We just started working with Health Policy Source some months ago, and we really needed much more of a direct line into DC. NCSA has a bunch of board members, but none of us are there in the Beltway. We aren't there, and we don't have all these people on our Rolodex. So it was really important for us to create that connection. And so if you're a donor to NCSA, by the way, thank you, because you're helping us go to the next level. I also want to say, if you do have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A. And of course, we will ask them mostly at the end, but if it's necessary to butt in, we will. Let's move on to our featured speaker. Do you want to stop?
I do have a meeting. I think I'd mentioned you, so I am gonna officially sign off. But thank you all for your time, and again, just reach out with any questions you have.
Okay, if you could just stop share. Thank you. Perfect. Yep. Thank you so much, Gayle. Right. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Susan, you can start share, and I will unmute you, or ask to unmute. Okay, now you have to unmute yourself down at the corner.
I think I did that.
You did. Yeah, you're perfect. Perfect.
Good.
Perfect.
Okay, good. All right. Now, how do I get rid of you two? Because you're covering some of
I don't know if you can. Oh, now your slides have moved over precipitously.
Really?
Um,
Oh, God.
it's,
It's
yeah, your slides. Are you having the same problem, Leanne, where the slides are too big for the screen?
Ah, let's try that. How's that?
Well, now we see your whole slideshow.
There we go. If people are having, if they go to their where they shows the grid of the speakers, they can kind of shrink that down so that it's not interfering. It looks fine for me at my
Are you seeing
viewpoint.
the entire slide?
I
Yeah.
am, and I know
Oh, then it's just me.
one of our
Okay.
attendants said the slides look fine for them as well. So
Oh,
I think we're
good.
okay. Yeah, I think we're okay.
Well, it's my goofy computer. Go ahead, Susan. Don't listen to me.
All
Okay.
right. Well, my name is Susan Goldstein, and I am the mom of a severely autistic daughter. She's 32 now. So I've been doing this since she was 2. So 30 years I've been doing this. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands, how I ended up where I am now. And so when I watch Gayle, it makes my head spin to see what happens at the federal level. Although I've been up there several times representing clients, I would much rather stay closer to home, and I feel like I can get more done. I did try it. I do have some friends that I served with that are now in Congress, but it's a very arduous process. So I'm going to try to show you how to make it a little bit easier. I'm with the Legis group. I have 2 partners, and they're both former members, like myself, and both of them were much higher level leadership than I was. Rob was the rules chair, who decided what went onto the floor for a vote, which is probably the 3rd most powerful, and also human services chair. And Doug Holder was commerce chair, which meant he controlled a lot of what happened in business. So I used to lobby them for my issues. And when they left office and hung out a shingle, I had so much business that I started working with them. So we do everything: education, health and human services, business and government. I'm going to give you some effective advocacy lessons that I have learned, both from being a parent and as a member. This is what I'm going to go over in my presentation. I'm going to go over my background. I'm going to talk about how to get involved locally and engage locally, and then how that drives you to get involved statewide. And then there's even a higher level, which is more political action committees and influencing elections, and then strategies for passing legislation, which we have done successfully. And Jill asked to talk about some current efforts, some past successes, and then we'll take some questions. Okay, anyone can do this. My background was in finance. I was a proprietary bond trader for a New York Stock Exchange firm. When Steffi was diagnosed, I decided to take a leave of absence, which became permanent. And because it was just so much, so fast at me. And then I evolved into a lobbyist. But when I started the journey, I never could have imagined the impact and the amount of influence have on policy and on assistance for people, providing services just by opening your mouth. And the way I started doing that is, having been a bond trader, I was raising money through syndications for municipalities, big cities, states, bonds for hospital districts, and what have you, a lot of public funding. And I knew how to raise money. When Stephanie was diagnosed, she went to the only school, this was 1994, the only school in the entire area. Back then, autism was 1 in 10,000. And it just so happened that she ended up in school with Michael Marino, Dan Marino's son. At the time, he was there. He was still playing for the Dolphins. Everybody knew who he was. we're trying to raise funds because there were so many people on the waiting and people that could not afford intervention. There were no programs. And so we started doing fundraising, and I was telling Jill in my last podcast that the first fundraiser I did was a spaghetti dinner, and Dan's mom made the meatballs, and we didn't make very much money. And I thought, good Lord, with Dan Marino, we could make a lot more money. And so we started doing other big events like galas and golf tournaments and auctions and lots of different things, but it never seemed like it was enough money. The kids just kept coming and coming. So one of the things that I did after we started raising a lot of money is I was invited to be on the board of governors at Nova Southeastern University, where the Bodwin School was located. And I thought, wow, this isn't bad. You know, you don't, if you're volunteering, you really don't have to worry what you say. Like, you're not going to lose your job because it's a volunteer position. So I helped drive that board agenda to expand that program, and we expanded it to statewide efforts. And so, long story short, I went to Tallahassee. My husband and I, with Dan and Claire, got $2 million for a therapeutic intervention program. It was a pilot program, and it utilized 4 or 5 different disciplines within university, which was speech therapy, OT, audiology, even back then, because we thought maybe there was something wrong with their hearing, and behavioral. And every year after that, the money wasn't recurring. So I had to go to Tallahassee and present the outcomes and show everyone what we did with this money and how many kids we helped and how much more we needed. And while I was up there, I started doing other things like helping to get group homes for children. We had no group homes for children that had a lot of aggression and serious behavioral challenges. So we did a group home with 4 overnight respite beds and 2 semi-permanent beds, and we got the funding for that. At the time, Dan was starting the hospital in Weston, which was the neurological diagnostic center with Miami Children's. And as a result, people were moving to our area, and we needed more and more and more. It was never enough. So I got a call one day from the incoming speaker and asked me if I would consider running as a candidate. We had just voted term limits in, and so I laughed. My husband laughed, and he said, "This is West Broward. You're never going to win." But honestly, I did. I won. I mean, it's a very, very blue area, and having been in the bond business, I was a registered Republican because that's how I voted for my business prior to even realizing that I would ever be in a position where I would have to help my daughter and my family. But in any event, I ran against a city commissioner, and I won. I won because I drew a distinct line between human services and social services. I said, the people that God put on this earth that can't help themselves are the first people that we need to help. And it really hit home with a lot of people. And so I became a state representative, and it was probably one of the high points of my life, walking into that chamber and seeing my name up there after having, gone through hell and have been at the lowest point in my life, learning about Stephanie's diagnosis. And of course, I was targeted for re-election. And I'll tell you that story later on. But in any event, that's how I ended up becoming a lobbyist. But do know that throughout that whole process, you run into so much adversarial nonsense that no good deed goes unpunished. And that's why I put that at the bottom. All right, I'm gonna take a thing of water. All right, advocacy is an ongoing process. At first, I wanted to get everything done, okay? But then I realized you first have to amplify your voice. You have to let people know at the local level how many are in your constituency? You have to build your vision locally, and you have to expand your influence throughout the local area. And you must persevere. It's not a one-time issue that you're going after like many people. It's a marathon. You have to run a marathon, but you cannot sprint at first. You only sprint when necessary. And you have to become resilient and hear the word no. And you've got to outwork everybody. You got to outwork your opposition and can't give up. And I just wanted to add that because, you know, people are so used to fighting for you're fighting for your family, you're fighting for your kids. And that's what I did. These are the local efforts that I think I became branded. At the bottom, you'll see it says brand yourself. I was branded the autism lady, and I didn't care. Nobody really knew what autism was, but I pushed myself into every meeting at the local level, every county commission meeting, every city committee meeting. There's always at the end of those meetings, opportunity for public input. I always said, why aren't our kids included in that recreation? So I always, whether it was the Children's Services Council, which was our taxing district at the time, you know, they only provided regular services with regular providers for typical children. And I said, where are your special needs services? Why aren't we getting them? So I even went to the hospital district meetings. Now, when I say taxing districts, these people are getting money from our real estate taxes. And so I'm paying for somebody else's family to have programs, but my family wasn't getting those. My daughter wasn't getting those programs. So I even went to, you know, work with the medical professions division at the university when I couldn't get Steffi and the dentist to say, you guys need some dental programs for kids with autism. In any event, I went to school board meetings. There were sub meetings to school board that parents could get involved in, like the district advisory councils and the exceptional student education advisory ad hoc budget. I got on that budget committee, and because I was also on the district advisory committee, I was able to make motions at school board meetings for audits to see why the money that was coming down from the federal government for IDEA wasn't following the children. There are also state and local agencies, district offices. So any agency in Tallahassee, I'll say Tallahassee, but your state capital, any agency in your state capital has regional offices, whether it's DCF or the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, Agency for the Department of Health, where children's service, the children's medical services come from. They all have local offices. Go in, find out who is working the population, the autism population. So right there, you can hit like 3 or 4 different agencies that are in Tallahassee, right there in your region. I even worked with our sheriff department, because at the time I was trying to get middle and high school after school care for kids with autism, so their parents didn't have to leave work. We had a parent, I had a parent contact me and say, son was arrested. And I knew her son. He was, I don't know, 6 foot tall. He was in school. He was nonverbal, very autistic. The mom, it was an early release day. The mom didn't get home in time to get him right off the bus. And so the called the police and said there was a prowler because he was trying to get in and he didn't have a key. He was looking in the windows. And so the police came, and because he was not compliant, because he didn't answer perfectly or properly, they hurt him. They beat the heck out of him. And so the parents called me and asked if I would go on this television show with them so that they could, you know, chastise the sheriff's department. And at the same time, I was still trying to get middle and high school kids that were not latchkey kids. They couldn't go by themselves. We didn't need programs back then. So I called the sheriff's department and I asked him, you know, I said, listen, working on some programs, you had a terrible, terrible episode. It's going to go viral. That viral wasn't a word back then. It's going to go on the news. And he said, well, what do you want? So what do you want to do? And I said, money. I want $150,000 for our middle and high school after school program. And first he said, Susan, I think that's extortion. I was like, no, it's not extortion. This is what we need. That's why our kids are getting hurt. And he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If I put up 70,000 and get the school board to match that, help you with your program. And that's how we originally got programs started in Broward County for middle and high school kids with developmental disabilities. And sometimes it takes really bad, it takes lemons to lemonade. It was a really situation, but you know, because that mom was so outspoken and ready to walk on, you know, the local news, that's how we got our program started. And, you know, it's nice to make sure that you know what every other community organization is doing. We work with the Dan Marino Foundation, ARC, Jacksonville's for Autism. It's nice to collaborate. Not only do you get to understand the programs, see if you could maybe get them in your public schools, but you can also use your constituency. There's a lot of kids that are in the constituencies, and you'll understand what I'm talking about when we move forward. But that's how we created a lot of local programs. Move on here. No, it's a lot, but these are just some of the boards that I sat on. I got involved. I did this so that I could capture those constituencies. The Autism Society, of course, is the first one that everybody really goes to, but then advocacy is infectious. I mean, I can't tell you how many groups started from this little Autism Society that we had. The SPEC was the Support for Parents of Exceptional Children. They had meetings. Reaching Potentials was another, back then we called it low-loss discrete trial training, but they worked to find and train people that could offer that. This was before any certifications for certified behavior analysts or anything. And the YMCA, I wanted to make sure that they had therapeutic pools for our kids. They had things for our kids. So all of these things that I sat on, I kept lists of everybody. Anyway, there's some organizations, you know, you could tout it off, want to be involved with. So my biggest and most valuable advice is do not stay involved in a toxic organization. All right, I know this is a lot coming at you, okay? I just wanted you guys to have all of this without me having to say it all and you take notes. But it's pretty much a synopsis of what I just went over. Foundation, advocacy is an ongoing process, amplify your voice, persevere, become resilient. So this is especially effective at the state level. So educate yourself about autism and explain to your local representatives, not just your commissioners and your county commissioners, but also your state representative, your state senators, and even your federal people. Explain the impact on your child and the supports that you have, and understand child's needs and what the existing resources are. Join support networks, engage in the community, engage with professionals. This is important. Engage with professionals and provider industry associations, especially therapists and educators who provide services, because they can come and testify for you when you get to the point where you're helping to craft policy. So it's always nice to have people that are experts in the field that could come and work with you in Tallahassee, because I was not an expert in anything except, you know, bonds. So I worked with Dr. Alessandri at the center in Miami. and Dr. Roberto Tuchman is at the Dan Marino Hospital. I brought them all to Tallahassee and told them, you know, and explained to them that they needed to get up and testify about, you know, the expanding population, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking too much. Also attend workshops and conferences. Okay. I attended workshops and conferences, but know the answer to questions and know the questions they're not asking. And you ask the questions. And if they don't know the answers, you tell them. And typically it's about services. It's about what happens in schools. There's so many things, but you can join these local organizations. You can join national organizations, but I just gathered as much information as I could. I always had something in my back pocket when I went to Tallahassee. I had information, and it is valuable. Build relationships with your elected officials and policymakers. At meetings, they have a town hall. Go talk about autism, talk about services, talk about, you know, transitioning from school to work, talk about adults and the services that are lacking, and share your personal stories, but use your social media, your blogs, newspapers. If something happens that you are not in favor of, write an editorial and send it in and say, this is not right, it's wrong, you know, we should not have rate reductions. There were some periods during the time I was advocating where, you know, all the agencies had to take a 10% cut. It's like, okay, how about the people that put the trees along the highway? How about they take a 20% cut and let us keep our money? Because, you know, when you sit down at the table with your family and you have to make cuts, you don't decide that, you know, you're going to cut the medicine and still pave your driveway. And you know, that's what they always claimed. Oh, we have to make cuts like everybody else. Anyway, there's priorities involved, but collaborate with your schools and your education systems and build positive relationships, because they can help you create programs. Also, identify, and this is really important, identify any legal guidance and advocacy groups. Like we have the Advocacy Center, because if you encounter barriers or discrimination or accessing any appropriate services, you have to know your rights in special ed and in aspect of disabilities. All right, legislative lobbying. That's our capital right there. I ended up in Tallahassee, but before that, I became involved. The best way to become involved is to become informed. Learn the process, learn what has to go through committee, learn what you can get into the budget with just language without passing bills, learn the rules, basically. Contact and visit your legislators. Make sure they know who you are, and sit down in I would say their district, meet with them in their capital offices, meet with district offices, candid conversations about your children and about your situation, about the support and the lack of programs. And I never brought my daughter to Tallahassee because she would be able to tolerate all of it. She has serious sensory issues, not to mention the 7-hour trip. But I have no problem bringing my daughter to the district office, and my local legislators knew who my daughter was, and it was easier for me to pay, especially if something happened. It gave me a reason to contact them. Also, really important, get to know your legislative aides. Aides hold the keys, and the aides listen to your story before they give it to your member, and they pretty much decide what gets before them and what doesn't. So always get to know your aides, establish a very strong relationship with them. Some of them don't last long, they're very little. A lot of them are interns, but typically the person that you're dealing with, it's an intern, ends up being the head legislative affairs person. for the member. So they work their way up. So always be kind and let them know who you are. Share your knowledge with them. If you have knowledge, or if you see a bill that's in a committee that their members are a part of, give them a question to ask. Give them some data. Let them know, what the prevalence is in your area or in your state for autism issues. But definitely share your knowledge, because then you'll become their source. They'll call you when they have a question. One thing I must, and this happened to me when I was a member, never lie to a lawmaker, never lie to a legislator, never embellish. Accuracy is essential. Always be respectful and courteous. I'll never forget the time, and I never ever took a meeting with this man again. He represented a very large organization that serviced a lot of people, and he lied to me. He lied to me and said that, 3 or 4 different organizations were in agreement and we want to get this legislation passed. And I was like, that's terrific. And it was my first year. And as it turned out, he made me look like a fool, because I didn't go back and check with the organizations if they really were in line with his language. And I never took another meeting with him. So never lie, always tell the truth, and become a force to be reckoned with. Here's some valuable tips for success. The squeaky wheel. I was the squeaky wheel. You got to be the squeaky wheel. One of the things that I did is I would invite legislators to speak at my meetings. If I had a meeting, or if I was on the board, or for an organization, I would invite them to come and speak. If there's more than 50 people at a meeting, you better believe they want to come and speak, especially in their own district. That's votes for them. I would also have them tour programs and facilities. I always had a little elevator speech. In case somebody said, oh, I saw you in committee, let us know what we can do to help. And it did help. It happened to me with the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association. I said, yeah, you can help. Do you happen to know this chairman, Pruden at the time? And he said, yeah, I know him. I'm like, you think you could get me on his agenda? Because I had a bill that I was, back then it was the autism insurance bill. But in any event, always be prepared, because you never know who you're going to run into, especially if you're at the Capitol. And one of the things that I do is if I can't get a meeting with somebody, I know their schedule because it's published, and I know what committees they serve on. So if I need to get to a legislator, I will wait for him to come out of his office to walk to his next committee and say, can I work with you? I just needed to talk. I just have one question about what's going to happen today in your meeting. So, people stand in line to get in these offices. If you can't get a meeting, just ask them very politely, do you mind if I walk with you? I just want to ask you one question. And so sometimes you don't have to wait behind 50 people that are, upset about what's going to happen in a committee or something. So that always helps. And typically they're very nice, but always be a consensus builder. There's always opposition, even within your own constituency. It's not a one size fits all. Some people are much more severely afflicted. Other people want forced inclusion. So you have to work with the opposition. And I can remember my head spinning when I was a member. And at one point I said, listen, if you guys can't figure out what you want, how do you expect me to figure it out? So I know that's what other members feel when they get different requests with respect to different legislation. So it's always good to collaborate with others and say, well, maybe we can't get this next year. Maybe we get this. Maybe we can't get it there, but maybe if we get this year, we'll get it next year. And that's something you have to make sure that these people know that are making the laws. You're not going away. If you don't get it done this year, you're just coming back next year. And that's what I tell them. If I can't get this year, I'm going to come back next year. And you don't threaten, but I usually come back stronger with more more organizations, more people. It's also helpful on now with these social networking sites. Always, you know, legislators contact the media, editorial boards, press conferences. If there's something that's terribly wrong that you know is going on, you can create a group and go public. Spread the word, get more people to get behind you if you're going public for or against something. Activate your grassroots, your school groups, strengthen numbers. But never give up, never walk away, because then they'll think that you'll do it every time. So you walk away one time and you with your tail between your legs, you know, it doesn't help you the next time you need something. So always stay involved, always ask questions, and always follow up. Do you want me to take a breath, or should I keep going, Jill?
Oh, no, you're doing fine. Keep on going.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end. I saw quite a few are coming in.
Okay. This was when I was a legislator. You create awareness events so that people know that, you know, there's a lot of strength behind your constituency. This was a resolution that I did when I was in office for Autism Awareness Day at the Capitol, and they've had it every single year since then. That's our majority leader, Adam Hasner. This was in the majority office, and we worked with the Centers for Autism and Related Disabilities. And that was a full room with media and parents. And, you know, we talked about all the legislation. You have to, you know, discuss it. And when you do, there's so many people that need these programs. They just show up in support. But one of the things I want to recommend is for people to apply for appointments to state governing boards. Now, you can do this in any area, whether you're an expert or not, in education, employment, HHS, Medicaid. DBPR is our Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They sanction all certifications. The governor and the presiding officers have hundreds of appointments. The presiding officers are the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. Every time something passes where there's some kind of a board that makes some kind of a decision, there's appointments, and the appointments, you know, are usually given to the Senate President, the Speaker, and the governor. Just like the DD Council, if you get recommended to be on the DD Council, you have to be confirmed by the governor, or you might be an appointee by the Speaker. But this happens for provider certifications, for behavioral people, therapeutic credentials. All the local taxing districts have appointees that have to be confirmed by the governor. Hospital boards, the exceptional education boards. These are very powerful. Even though you get paid nothing, at least in Florida, you do get to make decisions on a very large constituency of professionals. I mean, to tell you, when I started this, I could have become a certified behavior analyst by taking one test and signing my name. Now you got to go through 4 years of training. And so all of that adds cost. I mean, like I said, we did low loss back then, discrete trial training, but it was basically the same thing as ABA. And now the costs of the direct support professionals who do this are like this, because they had to get all of these extra degrees and continuing education. So it's always good. Just go on your governor's page, and there'll be an appointments area for your Speaker or your Senate President, and see what shows everything that's open. And if you want to one of these boards, it's always. All right, thing I wanted to touch on, I had to touch on this because I'm going to talk about emails from a member's perspective. Okay, tips for emailing public officials. First of all, make sure your subject fits on one line where if you look at the phone, you don't have to click on it to read the rest of it. Okay, short subject. And make sure if you've got a whole bunch of people sending emails about the same subject that you don't use the same subject line, because that's how you filter. That's how the members filter their emails. I have to tell you, my first session was a special session for Terry Shiloh. You all remember who that is. And I got over 1 million emails. So ones that I needed to see were not available to me because I was so barraged. The systems crashed. It was horrible. But there's definitely more enhanced filters. So if you're writing about a subject from the same group for an issue, don't use the same subject line. Use 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or even 10 different subject lines that say the same thing, because if it says the same thing in your subject line, your email is going off. And if I'm a member, I'm not even going to see it. Use proper titles, of course, and always recognize positions. Don't write an email to majority leader or to the speaker and call them Representative Renner. Call them Speaker Renner. Because even though, you know, we're just parents and we really should know that, it does irritate some people who are in those positions. Use clear, readable font, open with personal information. My name is Susan Goldstein. I'm the parent of a 32-year-old. Make sure you tell them who you always be respectful, courteous. Tell them immediately if you are a constituent. I live in your, my name's Susan, I have a daughter, I live in your district. This is what we need. If you write to a chairman of a committee that might be hearing an issue or might be voting on a budget, then you tell them who your representative is and say, I'm not a constituent, but I do have a daughter and this is going to be very detrimental. Please vote against this. And then immediately contact your legislator and say, I was just in contact with the chairman of the committee. Can you please go and tell them that I am your constituent and to please vote against this? And, you know, if you tell them what to do, sometimes they do it, a lot of times. And don't use any acronyms because many people don't know, especially with term limits. There's so many new people. And always, always, always follow up. All right, we're getting to the end, people. Anybody recognize this guy? That's Dan Marino's Walkabout Autism. So in order to have any type of real political influence, you can talk about all your groups all you want, but a picture is worth 1,000 words. Show proof of your strong constituency and your network. We had over 20,000 people at this. People knew that we had a lot of votes. Anyway, the best thing to do at these also is to recognize, especially the local public officials, if they're helping you. If they're not helping you, don't recognize them. But if they're helping you, recognize them at public events like this. Members love to go in front of thousands of people. Fundraise for individual candidates who really help you. You know, ours is a maximum of $1,000 per individual. I never ask for $1,000 checks. When I bundled checks from members from constituencies like parents, I ask for $20, $25 checks because I can walk in with $525 checks and hand it to a member. And his opponent might get 5 $1,000 checks from trusts. And so when they're building their war chest and the press is looking at their fundraising, because you have to file financial reports, they'll see this guy has a 500 people to his campaign. Only maybe 4, maybe a dozen donated to the other. And so that's why bundling low amounts is exactly what candidates want. And keep every contact from every group that you associate with. Keep them by email and by city and by profession if you could get it, so that you know who does what, and you know they might be able to help you with some events, maybe advertising or putting together videos. But the most important thing for me was in helping members and their elections, because we're talking now about political influence. If you help people get elected, they will remember you. One of the things that I do is when I talk to a member who I like and I want to help, who is very much in support of our issues, I say, what cities are in your district? Some of them have 5, some of them have 9, some of them have 13, some of them have several counties. I want to know, I want to know a list of every city, because what I do is I write a letter. I write a letter to everybody that I have on my email list and say, and I did it once for a member who actually had money left in his campaign, and he donated that to an autism organization. And I thought, I gotta help this guy. That was the nicest thing anybody ever did, you know, unprompted. And so I sent a letter and said, we need you to support Representative Hager. He has since passed away. He was kind enough to donate the excess of his campaign contributions, you know, to one of our local autism organizations. And we want him to come back into office because he cares about our population. So please vote for him. And I would ask them to, after you vote for him, this is his email address. Maybe just, you know, click on it and say, hey, thanks for some autism. Something short, something, but nobody ever says, I'm going to vote for you and thank you. You never get those kind of emails. So that's something that members remember. Legislative advocacy tools are good. They're extremely effective. If you can, you know, get the word out and get a bunch of people to respond immediately to something terrible that's happening, or something good that's happening, or thank yous to go out after something didn't get vetoed or whatever the issue was. But the next level really is to create a PAC that can influence. PACs can send mailings and do commercials on behalf of candidates. So get to a point where you have enough people behind you that you could create a PAC, a political action committee. I would encourage you to do it. You can do a commercial, you could do a short video or mailings. You can't say in a PAC to vote for someone, but you can say, please call Representative such and such and thank him for supporting our most vulnerable. And that is just as effective and valuable to a candidate as it is to, you know, do a real campaign commercial. Okay. So this is next level, creating, and I'm just going to go over this really quick. You can create a political action committee. We did this, and we knew every member intimately before they went in. We knew everything about their background, know their history, know their position on issues. And when you create a PAC, you can join with other PACs, and like we send questionnaires for candidates on our issues. If they answered them, fine. If they didn't, fine. I mean, there's some that people just don't want to answer. Like I remember when I ran and I got a questionnaire, you know, from the NRA, and my campaign manager said, just don't even answer it. Because you can't, there's no right answer. No matter if you feel this way, you say something wrong, and they hit you with commercials, negative commercials. It's really an ugly, ugly process. But one of the things we did was we would set up formal candidate interviews before elections. So we knew who the people were. This is before they were elected, before they became famous, and we would ask them questions. And sometimes you have different people around the table from different types of organizations, people that are for inclusion, people that are, for boys. There's no right answer when they come in. So when you set up formal interviews, I always used to be the last one, and I would do a lightning round, because they had to talk their way out of the answer, because they're not sure if it's the right answer. So I said, okay, we're going to do a lightning round. All right. So I'm just going to name an issue, and you tell me if you're for or against. I don't want any explanations. Just tell me, and so I would name things like, medical marijuana. Okay. For or against. Recreational marijuana, charter schools, opportunity scholarship. So you really can get an idea of which side of the fence these people are on. You just have to think about the questions you want to ask them. And then some of the things, when I got the right answers, I always had my checkbook. So I'd always write them a check. If I wanted to help them get elected, I'm like, I like you. Afterwards would have like a cocktail thing, and I'd say, here's a check. I want to support you. And some people are very, very grateful, and they'll never forget that you were with them before they got into office. And so always set up the interviews, ask the questions that are the most important to your constituency, and bring checks. But know your candidates, know the donors. If you're collecting checks for a candidate, and this happened to me, and this is one of the reasons I did not get reelected. I helped somebody early on, before I even decided to run for office. I helped a man get his daughter placed in a community group home. She was an adult, and he wrote me a check for $500, a personal check. But as it turned out, he was an executive with Big Sugar. Now, in my district was the Everglades. So there was a commercial that they made that because they were trying to get me out of office. And when you're on the chamber floor and you hold your hand up with your microphone to turn it on if you want to debate, they had a picture of me with my hand and a bag of money with a big dollar sign on it that said Big Sugar on it, that I was destroying the Everglades. And the commercial ran every 15 minutes. My husband and I would sit there, and my husband's like, Susan, I don't think you're going to win. This is a horrible commercial. We live in Weston, Florida. It's right along the Everglades. But it was a political action committee that wanted me out of office. And that's how that commercial single-handedly buried me. But it was, like I said, God works in ways. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I was making $29,000 a year. That's what I mean. These in Florida, at least, they get paid nothing. The kids get paid nothing. And so, one of the things that I would like to see is, rather than having their regular jobs interfere with the decisions they're making, pay them more money and tell them they don't, to leave their regular job, because there's always a conflict. Always. That's one of the reasons we never got our bill for insurance, mandatory autism insurance, because the speaker worked for Blue Cross. Bring checks, know your candidates, follow all their previous legislation, amendments, and their votes. Know your incumbents' votes, and just become an influential and powerful voice that reflect your numbers. Your numbers are big. You may not know it, but if you look to it, your numbers are big. And get involved at the next level. Group collaboration is really effective.
Susan, I just want to jump in for a sec just to say we should probably take questions pretty soon.
Okay, this is I think my last.
Okay, is this your last slide?
I think so.
All right.
So group collaboration is most effective. So get with professional associations like the Professional Association for your providers of service. Develop a joint agenda. Maintain communications with elected officials. Let them know that you're all trying to work together. Help with the re-election as they ascend. You know who's moving the ladder. Find candidates who deeply care about autism. Join a winning campaign. Look at the numbers. Is it a 60-40? Is it a 70-30? Know if the Democrat or the Republican is going to win, and help the one that is going to win, even minimally, just because you know they're going to be making decisions that affect your life and the life of your child. One of the biggest things you can do, is to work a precinct. People would say, I want to volunteer, I'm going to help you with your campaign. The biggest thing you can do is say, I have 3 or 4 hours to spare. What can I do? Work a precinct. I had like 75 precincts in my district, and there's no way you can be at every one on election day. But if you have somebody there with your sign, handing out your palm card, asking to please vote, she's helped people with disabilities, she's helped our most vulnerable, please vote. Working a precinct, if you don't want to donate money, is one of the best things you could do. And also raising a lot of small checks. These are some of the things that we passed in the past. The autism license plate, the therapeutic intervention program. We included autism in med waiver services. We increased our centers for autism and related disabilities. We started respite service for people that are on the waiting list, legislation for adults with disabilities where we can access more funds from Voc Rehab, which is a federal program. Funding for behavioral group homes, people that are really challenged. We also have the McKay Scholar. These are scholarships for kids with developmental disabilities who are not learning anything in their schools, and they can go and use those vouchers. Now they're called opportunity scholarships to get therapeutic intervention rather than, the academic, so that they're ready. We passed our license plate. We raised, yesterday, I went through 60 grants. We raised several $100,000 a year with that, and our check off that I talked to you about in our podcast. We did legislation for planned residential communities. We mandated autism training for police. One of the things that asked the PBA to help me with, the guy I met in the elevator. And we rewrote our 393 statutes for the people with disabilities, the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, because our guardianships, parents had to go to classes to be guardians. I'm like, I've been doing this 24/7 for 18 years. Why do I have to take a class to become a guardian? So we now have guardian advocate language where all you have to do is file with the court. But know the statutes. You'll run into, there's people that are on here that are older. There's people that are on here that are just starting the journey. There's lots and lots of things that you're going to come across that you're going to want to change. And these are some of the different legislations we passed. The autism plate took us 2 years. The autism insurance took 12 years. And when you're talking about things like insurance mandates, that's big. There's so much money and so much opposition. These people created, all these different providers created a coalition. They hired the governor's top fundraiser as their lobbyist. They gutted this bill year after year. We finally got final passage, and that's something that's very heart-wrenching to watch by Speaker Rubio when he was the speaker of the last bill of the session. I'm telling you, if you want to cry and be happy at the same time, it was so bittersweet because the Senate wouldn't pass the bill that the House sent over. The House included Down syndrome. They included other developmental disabilities. The Senate only wanted autism. So they weren't going to pass anything. And Marco Rubio got up and said, listen, we're never going to have perfect legislation. But there were two people. One was the majority leader, and one was the Democrat whip, and they both had kids that wouldn't qualify. And it was so sad. You know, the people that had kids with autism were happy, but it was so sad for everyone else. And it's something that everybody's going to remember for a very long time. But those are the things that you run into. These are the things we're working on now. And a lot of them are just every year: increase med waiver funding, fund the waiting list, you know, fund more, you know, crisis funding, and triage those that are waiting, stop state reductions in service limitations, direct support professional rate increases, need better transportation and economic opportunities. Some of our transportation that's done through our counties make these kids, you know, that are working, that are using, that they call it, ours is TOPS, but you know, each vendor is selected by each county, and some of them wait for over an hour, and I just think that's acceptable. So we're working on trying to get them to be able to use Uber and stuff. So these are all, I know you're in a hurry, so I don't want to go through all of them, but you know, we're always fighting 1,000-foot rule for our communities of support that I talked about in the podcast. Increased education options for people that have obstacles to employment. The pilot program for managed care. I always fought against managed care. Always thought there was never a reason to add a level of management and another payee when that's what the agency was for. So why do we have to go through a managed care company that not only, you know, may change the determination of what the assessment says and what you need, but also is taking something off the top? But there's so many people moving here, and our waiting list is now 20,000 people. That
How many people?
22,000, and growing. But they just put out their proposed budgets for next year, the agencies, and they're putting another 35 or 40 million into the waiting list. And that's honestly all it can handle, because we don't have the direct support professionals to implement their cost, their plans, their assessments. One of the things that I do and that I specialize in is I pick projects, and I know if people have the ability to bring their vision to fruition, and that is get them a line item in the budget, provide special appropriation fundings for funding for local projects and needs. And that's, I'll tell you, that's something that if you have it in your state, you can get a line item for a specific program that provides services to a large constituency of people. You're actually helping the entire state. You're helping that agency service those people. So some people will look at it as kind of like a parochial ask, oh, you just want it for your area. No, we want to help those people that are on your waiting list to get some kind of services. And, you know, it is a statewide service. It isn't a parochial thing, because anybody there that wants the service. So, you know, it's a word game. And that's it. I'm done.
Wow. I don't think there was enough advice in there, Susan, really. Over 101 points of advice for you for your local and state advocacy. I'm going to quiz you all to see what you remember. Oh my God, that was amazing. You know, there are a lot of questions, but I just want to start off with a really general issue that our constituents have. And that's, they're having a hard enough time advocating for their own child. They feel that, and I understand, I'm of course very sympathetic, they don't have bandwidth to go the next step, to do the things in your bullet points that I think are very important, right? To advance programs. Look at the success you have had, you know, by doing that. But you're Susan, like you're amazing. And I can't believe how much you've accomplished and the chutzpah you have and the confidence you have. What advice do you generally have for these parents who already feel very overwhelmed?
Call your state representative first. If you can't get something that you need and your county health department or your county resources aren't there for you, call your state representative. Your state representative is the closest person to you in your capital, your state capital. Senators have much bigger districts. Your state representative will help you. You could call your senator too, but that would be my first recommendation. Or call your
But
state.
I guess mine's a little more, my question is a little more conceptual, that, you know, they want to change things more broadly, but they're so consumed with the difficulties of their own child. How do they move past that? How do they have the time? How do they have the energy to do more general advocacy beyond their own immediate needs?
I would say fight for the services that would first provide you that opportunity, like respite.
Yeah. Okay. So get the services so you do.
You might not go like away for the weekend, or to the hotel with your husband to get away. That respite service might give you the time to go to Tallahassee or to go to your capital and say, listen, we're taxpayers. Our children deserve what every other child is entitled to. But, respite service is one of the first things that I went for.
All right. Thank you. Leanne, I'm going to turn it over to you for oh, I'm sorry, what?
I said, I know it's hard.
It is hard.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
But having a group, having a support group, and having people around you, that can help bear some of the burden is always really helpful.
Yeah. And I think, as people know, at NCSA, we don't really do a lot of direct state advocacy. We rely on people who are volunteers in their respective states, and we're there to support them. But we do want to build these voices. Leanne, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Real quickly, there's something called the NCSL, the National Council on State Legislators. Okay. When you see legislation happening in one state and then all of a sudden it pops up in 3 or 4 other states, because they're looking at what's happening in another state, there's actually meetings that go on where state legislators get together of like minds and they pass legislation. So and many people can sponsor that. You don't have to be a legislator. Legislators can attend, but you can also be a sponsor. So if you have a company that, and you say, we have this company, we really want to help these people. And a lot of parents do have companies. A lot of parents are successful, not all of them. And sometimes they're bankrupt very quickly. But if you have an opportunity to sponsor something and ask them to push legislation, not just in your state, but at the national council.
Yeah,
that's helpful.
Wow. Great bit of advice. Leanne, I'm turning it over to you for questions and further comments.
Sure. I just want to take a brief moment to thank everyone for attending. I know I've had questions about what advocacy was and how to do it. So I feel like we got a lot of great, real information from someone who's done it and been on both sides. So, make sure and add this into your toolkit. I want to also take a moment to just address to get more people involved. We are still looking for state chairs. Right now, I have a state chair for Illinois, Kansas, Texas, and I'm missing one. Who am I missing? Tennessee. Oh, I'm so sorry, Jackie. I'm Tennessee. So that's a good way to start getting involved is, if you have the bandwidth to be one of our state chairs and take some initiative and leadership for us, that would be a great opportunity for you to get involved if you have that. Once we get those state chairs set up, it will make it easier for those of you who don't have as much bandwidth to get involved, because you'll have someone kind of handling some of the upper level tasks that are needed. So please, if you are interested, please email me and let me know that you are interested in, and we'll talk. Just also, I want to go over, we are talking about a grassroots campaign. That's what our grassroots network is. And that really means from the bottom up. So that does mean we need individuals' involvement. And so the advice we had to talk, if you do have specific issues, if you are not receiving services, that we call it an empty waiver is the name that we're calling it. That is an appropriate task for you to contact your legislator and say, hey, my son is qualifying for this, or my daughter, we're not accessing those services. That's a great way to call attention to our population and the issue. So, you don't have to wait for us to tell you to advocate. You can take those opportunities yourself if you are in those positions. Just trying to see anything else. Oh, let's look at some of the questions. I think when I read some of the questions that we're getting, there is a concern. People are, Susan, maybe you can help us out with this. One of the questions people have they're concerned if they do kind of, if they are the squeaky wheel, they're kind of worried about maybe retaliation or coming off. Can you maybe have some pointers for people? I think some of this is a matter of decorum, but you probably have better advice that way.
Well, my advice is don't be bashful. You'll never get anything for your child or your family unless you ask, and you keep asking. There's nothing there. Who's going to retaliate against a parent that is only trying to help, the most vulnerable among us? This population there's so many other groups that aren't anywhere near the size of our constituency that have surpassed us in legislating and services and attention and funding. It's our kids should, and that's something that I have always said. The most vulnerable among us who have no voice. When I get up and speak, I say, I'm telling you this, but the people, think of 3,000 or 4,000 people behind me that don't have a voice, that can't tell you this. This is why I'm here. They don't have a voice. I'm their voice, your voice. They, through no fault of their own, God put them on this earth. They can't help themselves. They have to be at the top of your priority list. And, it hits them. They get it. And that's when I said I drew a line between human services and social services. Human services are people with developmental disabilities or nonverbal people who can't help themselves, people that are medically needy, that can't afford an organ transplant or can't afford the medicine that they need to keep that organ going. Okay, you can't just walk away from them. You have to help them. And of course, the frail elderly who have no families anymore. Those are the three populations. And yes, do we have to help people who are on drugs? We do. Do we have to help people who have issues with alcohol and other substance abuse? Of course we help them, but you help them once. You can't keep helping them and then not helping people that really, really need it, that have no other choice. They had perfectly healthy bodies. Yeah, they might have had mental illness, and they destroyed their bodies. And believe me, I know there are people close to me that has happened to. And sometimes it angers me. It angers me that, I had an aunt who died of alcoholism. How dare she, this beautiful woman, destroy her body when Stephanie never had a chance? It used to really anger me, and it took me a lot to get over that. But people do understand in the legislature that you have to take care of our most vulnerable, the most vulnerable.
I'd never heard the distinction between human services and social services before. I appreciate that. Thank you. Go ahead, Leanne.
Another question we got is some people are asking on various state boards that exist. Does it help to be registered with any prevailing party if you want to be a member of one of those boards?
You should be registered with the person you're asking to appoint you. But they, like in Florida, the governor is Republican. He's going to vote, probably. But he has I mean, our FEMA director was Jared Moskowitz. Moskowitz is now a congressman. And I'll tell you what, Jared Moskowitz was the best FEMA director we ever had. And it's a big position in Florida with all our hurricanes. Jared was a Democrat, and the governor saw how much he knew and the experience he had. He was great. And now he's our great congressman. And I know that the governor still thinks he's a great guy, and he's very smart and is probably very happy that he won. I mean, he wasn't happy that he left his administration to run for Congress, but the governor thought there's a lot of really good Democrats that are appointed to many positions in Florida. People just don't see that part of it. They hear what they hear on the mainstream media, and they don't know. But it's true.
Yeah. So another question we have is at the state level, the Kendra asks, what's the easiest way to find the local statutes, laws related to special ed, disability rights, etc.? How can they become educated in the state laws and disability rights relative to their states? What's some recommendations you have?
Every single legislature in every state has a website. In Florida, it's My Florida House. That's the House of Representatives. In Florida, it's floridasenate.gov, and that gives you all the information. And there's tabs on the side, you know, for budget issues, for meetings, for press releases. And there's also one for state statutes. I mean, everything's on the internet now. If you want to see the state statutes, you can pull it up. It's usually a PDF. So you could always do Control F, which means find. So if you're looking for a specific word, like if you want to look up at autism or you want to look up guardianship, just go onto the PDF that's on the website for the statutes, and they're usually, you know, volumes and volumes. But if you do Control F on a PDF, it's the way to find. A little box will come up and you can put your word in or your whatever trigger that you're looking for. That's how I do it.
Okay. I see a few questions. People are interested in the state chair position. If you are interested, there are some tasks and things like that I can talk, but please email me. I'm going to put it in the, let's see, in the chat. I think if you are interested in learning more about it, I will schedule a Zoom to talk to you. So I see a few questions about that. So everybody, if you check in the chat, my email's in there. So please do just message me there, and we can talk a little bit more about roles and responsibilities. It comes down to we're having the state chairs kind of take the initiative about what they want to prioritize as their issues. And in working with the other members of the National Grassroots Network, you kind of work together to figure out what your priorities are and kind of organize yourself. So we don't do a lot of micromanaging of these positions. We do try to accommodate and offer some resources to you, such as our Zoom and letterhead and letter writing that we can help support. So that's just a really high level explanation of the state chair, but please email me if you are interested, and we can talk more one-on-one.
I want to say the one priority, Susan, that kind of runs throughout all 50 states is, of course, about Medicaid spending for adult services. That's a huge priority for the people who follow us. You know, not only the wait list issue, but even assuming you're off wait list, you know, having a waiver that you can really use, because getting the services you need in the community is exceedingly hard. You mentioned, of course, the direct service provider crisis. Do you have any specific, I guess, ideas, advice when it comes to advocating for wiser and more Medicaid spending for adults with autism?
You know, I've told the chairman of these Health and Human Services committees year after year after year. It doesn't matter how much you allocate to take these people off the waiting list and or how much you allocate for services. What matters is the rate that is established for healthcare administration. If the rate to hire people to provide these services, whether it's personal care assistants or, you know, companions or whatever it is, if the rate isn't high enough, you're not going to have the people answering the call. Yeah, you'll have some people that really do have, you know, altruistic values and want to help the people that need help, but you're not going to be finding anybody that really wants to make money. So I always say, no matter how much you throw at these issues, you're going to have a surplus at the end, because you're never going to be able to find enough people to fill the positions that you have funded, because the rate that they get paid, the amount that is fixed and decided by the Agency for Healthcare Administration is too low. So I would say the first thing to do is go to your Agency for Healthcare Administration and advocate to increase rates for people who are direct service providers of the developmentally disabled.
Thank you. Leanne, back to you.
Sorry, I'm going through a little bit. Let's see. Pardon me, going through state boards, DSP training. Oh, DSP training is coming up. Like DDSI. I guess there's a few questions that are talking about oversight of agencies who are providing services. Programs but getting providers to comply with them is another story. So okay, so I think this person is in California, but I think there has been questions about that. Think the question is, how can you use a maybe legislative effort if an agency isn't providing services or oversight? It looks like, yeah. I'm trying to. There's a couple of them. There's another. So how could you combat an agency? They're saying in California, DDS, that isn't really providing oversight of our regional centers. I guess that
we have a tool that legislators use in Florida, and I'm sure other states have comparable tools. It's called OPAGA, and you just ask and it has to be done by a presiding officer or I think a council chair, to ask for an OPAGA report. And OPAGA stands for the Office of Policy and Government, GA, I don't know, the Office of Policy and Government Accountability. Every state should have one, and once they look into something, it's an oversight, but they do a very thorough check. And you know, if an OPAGA report, sometimes it's kept a little quiet that it's even happening. Some people don't even know, but you know, if you ask your state representative or your senator to request it, or ask their presiding officer to request it, because it's the only way that you're going to get to the bottom of it. Sometimes it'll happen. Sometimes they'll tell you, forget it, it's never going to happen. But your best bet is to go to the presiding officer, write a letter to the Speaker of the House and say, this is, you know, unconscionable. This needs to be investigated. Every state has a policy and government accountability department or organization that does it. They have a whole staff and they do a deep dive, and you can send them questions when you find out that they're, and you have to also follow to see, you have to follow news. If you go on these websites for the House and the Senate, of your state, there's news and it'll say, you know, an OPAGA study will be done on such and such committee or such and such uh, organization, association. They do it on a bunch of different things. So you have to just fight to get it done and then fight to include your information. But-
Another question coming out of Texas is, but it's a question that we see quite often is, this family is, you know, saying that there's very little in place for residential for their severely affected adult. So what would you recommend? What level of government would they start at talking to petition first? Would they go through the state? Would it be a federal task? How would you recommend them going about addressing their need for their loved ones?
Federal law requires them to have accommodations for people. That's what a waiver is. A waiver is you're waiving your right to keep your loved one at home, and you're turning them over to be a ward of the state. Okay, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And it has to be done through the courts, but then the state must look at the level of independence of your loved one and provide services. And if they're in what we call intermediate care facilities, it's between an institution, and we still have one institution in Florida, and the waiver. There's the home and community-based waiver means people are living in community-based settings in regular group homes with the support that is required by their assessment and paid for by their Medicaid waiver cost plan. But the intermediate care facilities for the developmentally disabled are federally funded, not state funded. Now, Medicaid does meet what the state puts in for group homes, but the intermediate care facilities are funded through the federal government. So those are areas where, or I should say facilities where there's sometimes complex behaviors, complex medical needs, and there has to be a medical person on staff. And that isn't required in a regular group home.
Okay. And then another question, more general, I think you kind of answered this already a bit. Is it better to contact your legislator or those who are in your, who are actually actively advocating for disabilities that are in maybe another, if you're not a constituent of them? Would you recommend them contacting the person who's actually advocating maybe on a disability committee, or would you think their best bet would be to contact their direct legislator?
Well, as I said earlier, you always go to the one that's making the decision or holding the committee meeting or chairing that committee, or, you know, deciding whether or not amendments can go on legislation. Always go to them first and then let them know who you are, what, you know, what issues you have with your child and how you want them to vote, and then go back to your legislator and say, I have contacted Chairman so-and-so. Please go to him and tell him that, you know, we need this legislation for this population. And, you know, make sure you follow up to make sure that she did. Then call back the chairman and say, you know, have you heard from, you know, Senator Robinson or whoever it is? I asked them to come to you. Or have you heard from Representative so-and-so? I asked them to contact you.
Follow up.
Leanne, I'm going to ask you to ask
Sure.
one more question, and then we
Yeah,
will wrap it up.
I'm trying to see if there's anything else. A lot of them are I think we've covered a good chunk of them. Trying to see if there's any. Oh, here's a fun one maybe to end on. One of our members said, I think your power is in your ability to keep asking. Do you think the ability to not take no is a key to your perseverance.
They used to call me the Black Knight. The Black Knight. I'll tell you, if someone says no to me, they just don't have enough information to say yes yet. So my sister used to call me the Black Knight. I don't know if anybody ever saw this Monty Python where the guy cuts his arm off and he's like, "You chicken, come and fight me." And then he cuts his other arm off and he goes, "Why are you running away?" And he's like, "You have no arms." And then he cuts his legs off. And no, you have to be relentless. You have to let them know you're not going away. You're coming back. And if you don't come back, you're going to send somebody to come back. And I'm blessed. My husband was very supportive. He's a CPA. He was very supportive, of me going back and forth and to all these meetings. But I was working full time anyway before that. We just cut our income by a few $100,000 when I started doing this for nothing. And that's
the perseverance. And I think, I just want to say to all of our members, and it can be disheartening at times, our situations, but I think we just can't give up. We have to support each other. And that's why we need to do what we're doing. That's why we need to come together. And it's not going to be easy, and you have to take no and keep on rolling and keep on trying.
And you have to pray a lot. I pray a lot. I just say, God, he's the last person I talk to in the night and the first person in the morning. What I know that I was called to do this, and I say, well, what do I do next? What can I do to help people?
And I think everybody on this, anybody who's listening right now knows they've been called in some format, and that's why they're here. So stay true to the cause, and we'll keep everybody going and try to get support and everybody grouped together. We are gonna, the end goal for the grassroots for me is to get everything propped up, get people in every state, out there and connected and networked. And then have our states interconnected too at the state chair level. Hopefully we'll have the state chairs talking to one another about what's working for them. And so, we do have hopes. Please join. Please, anybody, tell your friends who are in similar positions to join. We're hoping to make some of the advocacy letter campaigns that we can offer you that you can just send in, and it won't require significant effort. So please, have your, be involved at some level, maybe not the state chair, but, read those emails that Jill's sending out, because pretty soon, hopefully we'll have some letter writing campaigns going. But again, in the interim, feel free to contact about your specific situation, and contact your legislators if you have any daunting concerns about services not being provided. That is a cause to contact your legislator. So I think that's it. And welcome to our state chairs. I'm not sure if they're on right now, but hopefully we'll start seeing those stood up. Like I said, we have Texas, Illinois, Kansas, and Tennessee. There'll be Facebook groups. There'll be Google groups as well that you'll be communicating with. And so if you are in those respective states, you'll probably be contacted in the near term about maybe a webinar or a Zoom conference for those states. And hopefully we'll get some more people to raise their hand and get involved. Yep. So thank you, everybody.
It's a marathon and not a sprint. So we'll be around for a long time. Susan, thank you so much for that absolutely outstanding, incredibly thought-provoking, very inspiring presentation. I think everybody wishes they had just 10% of Susan Goldstein in them, to do this sort of work that you do for your broader community. So thank you. And I know we will stay in touch.
Pleasure,
thank you, Leanne, for helping us. And thank you, Gayle, who's gone. And this is being recorded. It should go up tomorrow, most likely, and it will also be on our podcast. So that was a very long hour. That was an hour and 41-minute hour, but it was worth it. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Signing off.